Okay, let's unpack this. If you want to understand prejudice, you can't just look at individual bad actors.
Right. You really have to look at the social rules of the game.
Exactly. So today, we are diving deep into the academic architecture, the frameworks that explain why us versus them thinking is such a fundamental and, let's face it, often destructive social thing.
Yeah, that's our mission. We want to give you a kind of shortcut to understanding the major theories. We're talking social identity, relative deprivation, realistic conflict, and intergroup threat theory, all the big ones that explain intergroup bias.
And we're going to trace the path,
Yeah,
starting inside the head, right? How your sense of self gets tied to your group.
precisely. We start there internally and then move outward. We'll look at how things like scarcity, competition, and, real-world threats can crank up that group identification volume to 11.
Okay, so let's start right at the foundation then. Social identity theory, or SIT, sounds straightforward, but the implications are, well, huge. So what is a social identity, really, and why does it seem so competitive?
It's actually quite simple at its core. Social identity is just the part of your self-concept, who you think you are, that comes from the groups you belong to.
Like your family, your nationality, maybe your favorite sports team.
Exactly. Your nation, your college, your fan group, your family. But here's the kicker, the really critical insight from the theory. People aren't just motivated to have a positive identity. They're driven to maintain social identities that are positive because they set their group apart, distinctly apart from others.
Wait, hang on. So the moment I identify with, say, Group A, I'm sort of psychologically pushed to see Group B as what? Inferior, even just a little bit, just to make my group feel better and therefore me feel better.
That's basically it, yeah. And the most striking proof, it comes from what researchers call the minimal group paradigm.
Minimal groups. What does that mean?
It means groups created out of thin air in the lab. Researchers literally flip a coin or maybe tell people they prefer one abstract painting over another and assign them to Group Klee or Group Kandinsky. The members don't talk, they don't know each other, there's no history, nothing. Yet instantly they show in-group bias. They start favoring their own randomly assigned group members. They'll give them more points, more resources, even if it costs their own group something overall.
Wow. That's genuinely fascinating. So just drawing a line in the sand, the simple act of categorization is enough to spark competition.
It seems so. That's the original us versus them. It really underpins this idea called the categorization competition hypothesis.
Right.
Simply viewing the world, viewing people in terms of in-groups and out-groups seems sufficient to generate competitive behavior because suddenly your social identity, your sense of self, is tied to that group winning or being better.
And this leads to that thing where we see the other group as all the same.
Exactly. The outgroup homogeneity bias.
Ah, yes. The gray blob effect. I've heard it called that.
The gray blob effect. Perfect name for it. We see them, the outgroup members, as way more similar to each other than they actually are. They all look alike. They all think alike.
Meanwhile, we, the in-group.
Oh, we are a vibrant collection of unique, nuanced individuals, of course. It simplifies the world, makes it easier to, compete against that sort of faceless block over there.
And this whole process, the competition, the simplification, it serves a purpose psychologically? That's the self-esteem hypothesis.
That's the idea. We do this, in part, to feel good about ourselves. When your group does well, achieves something, your personal self-esteem gets a little boost. It reflects positively on you.
Okay.
But what's really interesting, and maybe a bit counterintuitive, is it's not just about feeling good when you're already feeling good. The research suggests that people with perhaps lower self-esteem, they might be more likely to engage in this kind of intergroup bias.
Why? As a way to prop themselves up.
Sort of, yeah. Using their group's perceived superiority as a quick fix, a way to raise their own personal sense of worth, especially if they feel their self-esteem is threatened by something else.
Okay, that makes sense. Now let's talk about how strong that group identity gets, because it's not fixed, right? It can fluctuate. The source material says external events can really crank that identity volume up.
Oh, definitely. Group threat is a major accelerator. Self-categorization, how strongly you identify yourself as a group member, that tends to shoot up pretty quickly as the perceived difference, or especially the perceived threat, between your in-group and an out-group increases.
Maybe examples.
Well, a classic one often cited in the research is national identity. Think about how identification with one's nation often increases dramatically especially after major events, like the source points to the September 11th attacks in the U.S. People felt a shared threat, and national identity became much more salient.
And when that strong national identification gets mixed with, let's say, a less healthy worldview, things can get problematic.
They certainly can. That's where you sometimes see the influence of what psychologists call group narcissism.
Group narcissism, like individual narcissism, but for a whole group.
Kind of. It's this belief that your group is just undeniably superior, inherently better than others, coupled with this active denial, this pushing away of any negative aspects or flaws of your own group.
Right. So it's perfection plus defensiveness.
Exactly. And when that kind of toxic superiority complex is floating around, then increased national identification, maybe sparked by a threat, can lead much more directly to prejudice, especially towards immigrants or anyone seen as an outsider.
But crucially, there's a nuance here, something that maybe offers a bit of hope. Our sources emphasize that just because you favor your in-group doesn't automatically mean you hate the out-group.
Yes, that is such a vital distinction. Liking your own group, in-group favoritism, does not have to equal out-group hostility or rejection. It's not necessarily a zero-sum game.
So what makes the difference?
Well, one fascinating finding is about the complexity of a person's social identity.
Complexity.
Meaning how many different important groups you see yourself belonging to and how you manage those identities. Think about it. You might be a parent and a fan of a certain team and a professional in your field and a member of a local community group and identify with your ethnicity or nationality.
Okay. Lots of different hats.
Lots of hats. And the research suggests that the more complex your social identity structure is, the more non-overlapping groups you identify with, the more tolerant you're likely to be of other groups overall.
Why would that be?
Well, maybe because you have more psychological resources. If one identity feels threatened, you don't have to pour all your defensive energy into just that one. You understand implicitly that people can belong to many groups, that identity is multifaceted. You don't need to rely solely on simple us versus them superiority for your self-worth.
That's actually really interesting. Okay, so that covers the internal psychological foundation. Now, let's shift gears. Let's step out into the real world, the world of limited resources, competition, and conflict. We're moving to relative deprivation theory, or RDT.
Right. RDT shifts the focus. It explains dissatisfaction and resentment not based on absolute conditions, but through comparison.
Comparison to what?
To your own past situation, or more often, comparison to other people or other groups. It's not about being objectively poor. It's about feeling poor, or feeling like you have less than you should have relative to some standard.
So it's that feeling of, hey, they have X and I deserve X too, but I don't have it. That's not fair.
Exactly that. Dissatisfaction bubbles up into resentment when people decide they lack something. Could be money, status, opportunity, respect that they genuinely believe they deserve to have. It's this perception of unfairness that's key.
And I guess that feeling gets worse if the system feels unfair too.
Precisely. That resentment gets amplified when perceptions of justice are low. That could be distributive justice, like are the outcomes, the resources being distributed fairly? Or procedural justice, was the process used to make the decisions fair, even if I didn't like the outcome. If both feel unfair, resentment climbs.
Okay, now here's a really important distinction for our topic, for prejudice. Does any kind of deprivation lead to blaming other groups?
Ah, good question. No, not necessarily. The theory distinguishes between personal and group relative deprivation. You can feel personally hard done by, like, I'm not getting paid what I'm worth compared to my colleague. That might make you unhappy, but it doesn't usually translate into generalized prejudice against an entire outgroup.
So it has to be about the group.
Yes, it's only group relative deprivation, that collective feeling that our group, people like me, are being unfairly shortchanged compared to that other group that consistently correlates with intergroup bias, prejudice, and hostility.
Okay, so it's they're getting ahead and we're being left behind unfairly.
That's the core feeling. But wait, there's a twist. The source material points out something fascinating called relative gratification.
Gratification, so the opposite of deprivation. Feeling good.
Kind of, yeah. It's the satisfaction you get from believing your in-group is actually better off than other groups. And here's the punchline. Even feeling relatively gratified, feeling like your group is superior or doing well compared to others, can also fuel prejudice.
How does that work? If you're doing well, why be prejudiced?
It seems it's about maintaining that perceived advantage. Focusing on your group's superior position, maybe feeling a bit smug about it, can still reinforce bias and hostility towards the outgroup you see as beneath you. perhaps to justify your better position or keep them down. It shows prejudice isn't just for the resentful and deprived.
Interesting. Okay, so whether we feel deprived or gratified compared to others, it can lead down the same path. This feels like a natural lead-in to actual open conflict. Which brings us to realistic conflict theory, or RCT.
Exactly. RCT is maybe the most straightforward theory in some ways. The core idea is super simple. Dislike for outgroups often stems directly from seeing them as competitors for scarce, tangible resources.
Like land, jobs, money.
Land, jobs, money, political power, things where there's a zero-sum feel. If they get more, we get less. People are fundamentally motivated, RCT argues, to maximize their own group's rewards, even if it's at the expense of another group.
And the classic study here is the Robbers Cave experiment. Right. That's still foundational.
Absolutely foundational. You have to talk about Robbers Cave. Remind us what they did.
Well, back in the 1950s, Mosafir Sharif and his colleagues took these ordinary 11 and 12-year-old boys at a summer camp. They split them into two groups, the Eagles and the Rattlers, kept them separate initially to build group cohesion.
Right. Gave them flags, names.
And then they introduced competitive games. But the key was the goals were exclusive. Only one group could win the prize, the trophy, the bragging rights.
And what happened?
Instant hostility. It wasn't just friendly rivalry. The boys started calling each other names, raiding each other's cabins, burning flags. It got pretty intense. It showed that just having competition for stuff only one group can get is enough to generate real intergroup conflict and prejudice. No deep-seated historical hatred needed.
A powerful demonstration. And, while RCT started with tangible resources like camp prizes, it's been expanded.
How so?
Well, researchers now apply it to competition over more intangible things, too. Things like cultural resources. Think about conflicts over political ideologies, religious beliefs, social values, or whose norms should dominate in society. These can feel just as zero-sum as competition for land or jobs.
Which leads us to think about situations where one group actually dominates another over a long period. What happens then, according to this conflict perspective?
Well, the theory outlines a couple of paths depending on the dynamics of power and resistance. In situations of stable oppression where the dominant group's power is overwhelming and unchallenged.
The subordinated group just accepts it.
Often, yes. They might accept the dominant group's negative view of them. Sometimes this can lead to what's called false consciousness.
False consciousness.
Yeah, it's holding beliefs that actually run counter to your own group's genuine interests, essentially buying into the ideology that justifies your own subordination. Like a group internalizing the idea that they deserve their lower status.
That sounds grim. What's the alternative?
The alternative is unstable oppression. This is when the subordinated group starts to reject those negative stereotypes, challenge the dominant group's control, and develop hostility towards the dominant group. They fight back.
And how does the dominant group react to that challenge?
Well, it depends on how they perceive the challenge. If the dominant group comes to see the subordinated group's demands as somehow justified, maybe through moral persuasion or seeing the costs of continued conflict, then sometimes tolerance, concessions, and social change can follow. The source mentions the U.S. civil rights movement as potentially fitting parts of this.
But if they see the challenge as unjustified,
then the reaction is typically the opposite. Increased hostility, more negative stereotyping, maybe even harsher oppression. Why? To delegitimize the challenge, maintain the status quo, and justify their continued dominance.
Okay, we've covered identity needs, scarcity, direct conflict. It feels like we need something to tie these threads together.
And that's where Intergroup Threat Theory, or ITT, comes in. It really acts as a synthesis and integration of the theories we've discussed.
So ITT pulls it all together.
Pretty much. It argues that prejudice isn't usually caused by just one single thing, but emerges from the perception of two main integrated types of threat posed by an outgroup.
Okay, what are the two types?
First, you have realistic threats. These are the tangible concerns about the in-group's power, its resources, its physical safety, its economic well-being. Does that sound familiar?
Yeah, that connects right back to realistic conflict theory and relative deprivation. Worries about jobs, safety, political clout.
Exactly. And the second type are symbolic threats.
Symbolic, meaning threats to values, culture.
Precisely. These are the perceived threats arising from differences in religion, core values, morals, attitudes, norms, worldview. It's the worry that the outgroup, just by being different, is somehow undermining the in-group's cherished way of life, its sense of identity, its moral standards.
Which links back to social identity theory, that need for positive distinctiveness and the anxiety when that feels challenged.
You got it. ITT says it's often the combination of feeling both realistically threatened, our resource safety, and symbolically threatened, our values identity, that produces the most intense prejudice and desire to keep the outgroup at bay.
Now, to see these dynamics play out in their most extreme form, we unfortunately have to look at hate groups.
Yes, and the first thing to do, always, is debunk the common myth about who joins these groups.
Right. The stereotype is often, poor, isolated, uneducated individuals maybe living on the fringes.
That's the stereotype. But the research, the actual studies of members, paints a different picture. Most members are surprisingly middle class. They're often reasonably well educated.
And they don't usually just wake up one day and decide to join?
No, not typically. Most people are recruited, and crucially, they're usually recruited by someone they already know and trust, a friend, a family member, a coworker.
So it's a social process, not just an individual one.
Very much so. And the recruitment itself is often gradual. It's like that frog in the boiling water analogy. It might start with seemingly innocuous events.
Like what? A barbecue, a community meeting.
Yeah, maybe bring the family type events, things designed to present a sense of normalcy, community, belonging, before the really extreme ideology gets introduced.
And how do they make that leap from everyday person to, well, someone embracing hate?
The conversion process often leverages what the source material calls everyday racism.
Everyday racism.
Yeah.
I mean, like common biases or assumptions.
Sort of. It's described as the sort of background assumption, particularly in North American culture historically, that European Christian values are the default, the norm, the correct way. Recruiters tap into that existing, often unexamined bias and work to intensify it, to transform it into extraordinary racism, explicit hatred, and dehumanization.
What motivates people to be receptive to that?
Often, individuals drawn in are seeking solutions. They might be grappling with big philosophical questions, feeling adrift, or dealing with significant personal grievances or anxieties about the world changing. The hate group offers seemingly simple, comprehensive answers. Clear villains, a clear path, a strong sense of identity and purpose, however warped.
And once someone is in, the group works hard to keep them there, right? Through socialization.
Absolutely. It's about creating an echo chamber. New members are often systematically isolated from opposing viewpoints from mainstream media. They participate in group rituals and activities that reinforce the ideology. Critically, relationships with friends and family outside the group are discouraged and often wither away.
Creating total dependence on the group.
Exactly. The outcome is often a profound reshaping of the person's identity. Their racial or group identity becomes absolutely central. They adopt the group's entire worldview. And chillingly, they often become increasingly desensitized and more tolerant of the idea or even the reality of violence against minorities or other targets.
Is it prominent, though? Or do people leave?
That's actually a really important point. Membership is often highly unstable. People do leave. Many leave.
Why? What prompts them to get out?
Several things. Often it's disillusionment. Maybe the group doesn't live up to its promises, or the reality of the hatred and potential for violence becomes too much. Or, significantly, it can happen when they manage to renew relationships and social ties outside the group structure. Reconnecting with former friends or family can provide a crucial pathway out.
So bringing this all together, what does this deep dive mean for you, the listener, trying to understand prejudice? We've journeyed from the basic need for a positive group identity
Right, that fundamental psychological engine inside all of us.
to how that gets magnified by perceived scarcity and competition over resources, both real and symbolic.
And then how it gets activated and intensified by perceived threats, whether those threats are to our safety, our status, or our core values and way of life. It's not just about individual bad apples. It's deeply embedded in our social psychology.
Prejudice is a complex social phenomenon.
It truly is. And if we circle back to that really interesting finding from social identity theory, remember, the idea that having a more complex social identity, identifying with multiple diverse groups, tends to increase tolerance.
Yeah.
Well, that raises a final, maybe provocative thought for you to chew on. We know that things like self-categorization and our basic human need for certainty can drive us towards simpler, stronger group identities, especially under threat. So the question becomes, in a world that often feels like it's constantly trying to push us into simple opposing camps, what specific actionable steps could you as an individual consciously take to cultivate a more complex, more nuanced, multi-layered social identity for yourself?
Something definitely worth thinking about as you navigate the complex social lines out there in the world. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.